other than the normal measurement of what did we do post-mortem, is actually reviewing the possible impact of if we wouldn't detect and if we wouldn't find out and be proactively looking for it. And this is actually very helpful because with this what if scenarios, I have been able to make sure that our CFO is with me when there is a need for investing on a proper detection and a fast response time. So what we are basically looking for is the vulnerability testing as part of every software release. And then the ad hoc testing as we build further and further. I do have in staff the white hackers that their sole job is to find those vulnerability. And in some cases, we even have at the global level crawlers that look into the social media and some dark webs for bragging points that we have hacked or we have found the vulnerability here and there. So basically keeping an ear and eye on the areas that there are some news about this as well.
It is a very interesting topic, and I don't think anybody will say like I can detect 100% of the attacks, right? Because this is an ongoing challenge. Like there will be always new ways of attack, and then you got to learn from that, and you got to configure and re-trigger your system and make the change to put controls based on the new way of attacking. We have seen change the way of doing fraud or attacking since the COVID, right? It was more system automatic attacking. It changed to a very interesting way of like they hire a group of humans who does like not huge traffic, but low traffic human doing the attacks that you would not be able to use the regular tools to detect if that's an attack or it's a human legit customer. This is an example of the way of changing themes, but it could be many others that's coming. So it has to be a continuous learning of new ways and then put controls in places. In terms of the traditional ways of like risk assessment and vulnerability assessment, yes, we are doing that, but there's always other ways. For example, the bounty program, it's a new way of incent external parties, hackers to detect errors and then reward them. It's more a healthy way of encourage people to find bugs.
Alterna, we maybe focus on people, processes, and technology. And people need to be trained, have the knowledge, skill, and expertise to deal with this emerging technology and the emerging threat that is happening every day. Technology also needs to have the capability to tackle the new emerging threat and risk. We also need to constantly evaluate the technology and tools in place to make sure that they are effective. We also need to evaluate and check our processes to ensure that they are current and they're up to date, because people moving in the organization, processes are getting dated and needs to be reviewed. So I think one good way to achieve all of this is to simulating an incident or an attack. By that, you can then test and ensure the technology and processes are current and effective, and also the people are equipped with the tools and technology and knowledge to do their part also. When we conduct this attack, simulation and incidents, we can assess our threat detection and prevention capability, and we can capture some good metrics that we discussed, like time to detect, time to respond, and also system availability. These are very effective. And also for the plan that I discussed it earlier, for incident response plan, I think one effective way to test that is that to simply conduct a tabletop exercise to identify their strength and weakness, and it's going to be a very good learning opportunity across the organization, because you need to cross-function with other departments to conduct that test.
Some of the key points have been addressed by the previous speakers. That's the best thing when you're number 4 on the same topic. So thank you for covering. But I wanted to add one more as part of the practice. And I think Monique actually shared too, as they actually keep an eye on the KPIs, they track those. But you have to set up different tables also where checks and balances are in place. So to me, I'm just going to table the concept around looking at your IT's GRC table, and you continuously ping and bring those right players at the table so everyone is on top of those when it comes to managing the risks. So you have to continue to flag them. At the same time, also go back and saying, we actually decided to do this work to mitigate this one. What is happening on that space itself too? So I think having those multiple tables, not just one around focus on cyber landscape, but overall has a governance table that needs to be in play, pinging all different players in your organization, helping you to manage and mitigate it. For us, the attacks are not just external, internal too. Some of our own students after 10, 12 years of learning are super smart too. And I treat them like a professional hacker. And they get to actually do some of their hardening of their skills in our sandbox. So we need to actually be careful on both fronts, inside and outside, within our own district itself too.
It's been a bit of a journey for us. So we started this journey back in 2018 to do some evaluation in the marketplace on who would be the right partner for us. Specifically, we were looking for partners and tool sets dealing with advanced endpoint malware. Many of those are domains we've talked about already today, right? Threat and vulnerability management, attack surface reduction, endpoint detection and response, and then on top of it, automated investigation and remediation features. So over the last 3 years, we've put in place a platform and we've continued to advance the automation in those platforms, specifically honing in on auto remediation of unwanted and malicious software detection.
Again, very much aligned with Monique's part, where you have to really look at your requirements, look at your attack surface and what your organization needs, and yet, in our case, combine both information technology as well as operational technology, because both have a very separate need as far as how to protect and remediate. And again, I echo the fact that auto remediation is very key, but one part around aligning your strategic technology partners, like in the SOC has to be aligned with the NOC. We have a worldwide network that we support. And so the SOC has to be very much aligned with our Network Operations Center. So that was one of the requirements. The other requirements around, emerging digital platforms that we're all doing a POC. Natalia mentioned POCs before, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Natalia, because as you look at these emerging platforms and they come into a POC, your MDR is lighting up, right? You go, oh, this is a bit of a problem, right? And then you've got to understand that a bit better. Certainly aligning your infrastructure and your outsourcing partners. Most of us are in a hybrid mode. And so to align them as far as the MDR requirements you have and to include them as part of that MDR, because they also have huge vulnerability points. Your consulting partners, because many of us have consulting projects running, they're in our systems in some way, shape, or form. Even if they're in a sandbox, they're still in. And even though they're segmented, isolated, they're still in. So make sure we align those requirements, right? And then to Monique's point around the KPIs, certainly, the KPIs have to be aligned with what you need and how you measure and what's remediated. But I think it's important to, as a CIO, to look at the raw alerts and see what the raw alerts, what becomes unfiltered alerts, which back to Chris's point around ML and AI, are you training the filtered alerts? And then what really ends up being automatically remediated, and what's the percentage of that, and what the number of tickets that get created around the auto remediation, including lockdown, because we have to lock down OT machines immediately. We can't wait because we just don't know. So I think the lockdown piece is very important. And then what gets escalated to your team because of your legacy apps, or to Brian's point previously, we forgot that IP was active and that machine was active. And what's your driver? Like I look at right now, 4% of the tickets opened will end up with my team. And then so I say, well, does that make me more secure? And how do I reduce that 4%? How do I reduce the number of tickets being created? And then I look at that to say, I'm now more secure than I was last week.
We developed proprietary software as a service solution for our clients, where we tap into their practice management systems and pull health-related data. So obviously, we need to be very careful with protecting that data. We are a very small company, and we can't afford having a dedicated security personnel and experienced security personnel. So we were looking for experts to take charge of monitoring our environment, obviously, for threats and proactively responding to them. We looked at a number of solutions, but what we found is that many of those solutions were not necessarily focused on SMB market. They were too big and more targeting large organizations. So then we came across this solution, and when we piloted this MDR solution, I was a bit surprised that during the initial scans and for the first several weeks, there was no really significant vulnerabilities were found. So we decided to run this simulated test, and that worked very well for us. Within a few minutes, we heard back from the provider, and they locked down the endpoint. So we were quite happy with that, and we've been running them since. Every so often, we repeat these tests just to be sure that they're still doing a good job.
One of the reasons that I do sit on 4 boards is just because I can't sit still. But the other one is I think it gives me a distinct advantage of being able to compare and contrast what's going on at the different organizations. And I mentioned that I'm doing some work with the bank, so I like to be in a consulting role to understand, again, hands-on what's going on. And even, through sessions like this to learn what other CIOs and organizations are doing, because I really think it's super critical to share information. We've talked about partnership. There's just no one of us that can do this on our own. We need to learn from each other. We need to share, and we need to have a collective approach to this. Having said that, I would also just ask you to think about it from the board's perspective. Chris mentioned this about vendors, and we as a board, we trust all of our CIOs. Everything you're talking about is what we're doing at our management organizations. But we as a board have a fiduciary duty that we need to look at the vendors and look at them in the eye as a board and make sure that we understand what they're doing for each of our organizations. So we at the board level are inviting our third-party vendors, specifically the cybersecurity ones, to come and talk to the board and tell us exactly what they're doing. I know we hear it through you, the CIOs, and it's not that we're doubting you, but we just really need as a fiduciary duty to do that, our own due diligence and talking to these vendors and understanding what capabilities they have and what they're bringing to the table. So I'd just be cautious if your boards ask for that. Do not think that they're not believing or trusting in what you're doing. It's just a fiduciary duty of the board to have to look at these vendors ourselves and get our own comfort level and assess our own risk.
You've been buying detection and response from your antivirus vendor. You just haven't been calling it that, right? You need somebody that's going to stay in line with what the adversary is doing, right? New techniques, new scenarios are going to come up. Your managed detection provider has a simple surface, right? Your endpoint, network, and cloud. That's what they're trying to protect, right? And it should be those 3 in unison, and that they should have an ability to demonstrate the block rate of those new scenarios, the dwell time, and the signal to noise ratio that they're going to use. And if they're not working on that problem continuously, you're just measuring them on an SLA on picking up the phone. You hear it in small ways. When Michael says, hey, we tested them and then they got up and figured it out on time and we like that, right? That's a continuous exercise now. If we're talking about autonomy, we're talking about moving to faster SOC, right, to get ahead of these attacks. We're talking about a continual maintenance of those 3 metrics and a continuous drive down. So I think that that's how you evaluate them. You bring the vendor in and say, show me your block rate versus what I got. Show me your dwell time. Show me your signal to noise ratio. Show me it on the endpoint, network, and cloud. And then let's talk about how that's going to keep continuous and maintain as the attacks change, because that's the job, right? So that's how we measure ourselves. We're offering that assessment to everybody here for free. The dark web information we know, the new threats we know, the ability to test your existing block rate, dwell time, signal to noise, because those are the very key metrics about whether or not you have the stuff that needs to go into making the boom that starts all the IR and all the other stuff we hope to put into action on a bad day.